The snow had made Graham Voss's cabin look peaceful, almost untouched by the world. But just after dark, a wounded deputy reached his porch with a dying Strength in her hands. She was not asking him to save her first. She was dragging a bleeding German Shepherd K, 9 named Atlas, through the storm. Graham had spent years avoiding the kind of trust only a dog can give. Now that trust was lying on his floor, injured, breathing, and refusing to give up. If this story moves you, tell us where you're watching from, and please like, comment, and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. By the time Graham Voss turned off the county road and took the narrow track into the pines, evening had already folded itself over Bitterroot Valley. Snow fell in thick, steady curtains, softening the world without making it gentle. It settled on fence posts, on the black arms of cottonwoods, on the roofs of barns that had leaned into Montana winters longer than most men leaned into marriage. The headlights of Graham's old truck carved 2 pale tunnels through the storm, then lost them almost as quickly. He drove slowly, not because he was afraid of the road, but because he respected it. A man could survive many things by not pretending the earth owed him mercy. His shoulders ached from the day. That morning he had patched the roof over June Pritchard's little diner after ice had torn loose a strip of flashing. By noon, he had pulled Otis Bellamy's truck out of a snowbank, while Otis stood beside him declaring, with great dignity, that the truck had chosen a dramatic resting place. Later, Graham had stacked firewood for the Harpers, an elderly couple who insisted they could still do it themselves, and then watched him do every log. It had been a good day in the way Graham allowed days to be good, work done, hands useful, no one asking what he dreamed about. No one asking why a man with his training, his back, and his history had chosen to live alone in a cabin where winter had the manners of an old wolf. The cabin appeared between the pines as a small amber glow. It was not a gloomy place, though people in town sometimes imagined it that way. The logs had been sanded pale by weather and care. The windows shone warmly. Smoke rose from the stovepipe in a slow gray ribbon before the wind worried it apart. On the porch sat a splitting axe, 2 bundles of dry pine, a pair of snow-crusted boots, and a wind chime Graham had made from empty brass casings long ago. He had never explained it to anyone. When the wind moved through it, the casings clicked softly together, not quite music, not quite warning. A memory trying to speak, then changing its mind. Graham parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. The storm pressed against the truck. For a second, he saw another white place. Not Montana, not home. A hillside cut by smoke. A dog's dark shape moving ahead through dust and broken light. Bishop, ears forward, believing every command as if men were gods, and gods never made mistakes. Graham blinked once. The cabin waited. He got out, hauled in a canvas bag of supplies from town, and shouldered the door open with the easy, economical movement of a man who had spent years learning not to waste strength. Inside, warmth met him at the threshold. Pine smoke, leather, coffee gone cold in the pot, the faint metallic smell of tools on the kitchen table. He shut the door against the wind and let the silence settle back around him. It had become a companion over the years, not a friendly one exactly, but predictable. It did not ask him to be better than he was. It did not need comforting. It did not place its life in his hands and look at him as if failure were impossible. Graham changed out of his outer jacket, but kept on the olive-drab combat shirt beneath it. The fitted body worn soft with years of use, the camouflage sleeves faded at the elbows and marked by pale horizontal bands around the upper arms. It was not a uniform anymore, not officially. Just cloth now, cloth, memory, and habit. He ate standing at the counter, stew reheated in a small pot, bread torn in half, black coffee that had turned bitter but still did its job. Then he checked the stove, banked the fire, set a lantern battery to charge, and wrote 2 notes in the little book he kept beside the sink. Harper Chimney needs wire brush. Otis owes nobody an apology, despite what the truck thinks. The second line made one corner of his mouth move. Almost a smile. Almost. He had just lowered himself onto the couch when the sound came. At first, he took it for a branch scraping the porch rail. The wind did that sometimes, dragging the forest's fingers over the cabin as though testing whether the house still belonged to Graham or had finally gone back to the trees. Then it came again, a dull pull across wood. A pause, then a weak, uneven scratch. Graham sat up. The cabin seemed to hold its breath with him. Another sound followed, quieter and worse, the faint scrape of claws against the porch boards, too tired to be a threat, too deliberate to be nothing. Graham crossed the room without reaching for the rifle above the door. Not yet. His hand moved instead to the lantern on the side table. He turned the wick up, then stood to the side of the window and looked through the frost-edged glass. Snow. Dark pines. The porch light trembling in the storm. And a shape at the steps. No. 2 shapes. One human, folded nearly double beneath the weather. One animal, broad and dark, half dragged across the threshold of the porch. Graham opened the door. The wind shoved inside first, full of snow and teeth. A woman stood there in a deputy's winter jacket, streaked with slush, mud, and blood. She was maybe late 30s, though exhaustion had stripped age from her face and left only willpower. Brown copper hair had come loose beneath a black knit cap. A cut at her temple had frozen dark along one side of her face. Her lips were nearly colorless. Both hands gripped a belt tied around the chest of a German shepherd. The dog lay partly on a torn snow jacket, the fabric bunched beneath him like a poor man's sled. He was large, yellow, and black, with a dark saddle across his back and a black muzzle silvered with frost. One ear stood straight. The other, notched at the edge, bent slightly under the weight of snow. His eyes were open, deep amber brown, alert despite the pain. The woman tried to lift him another inch. Her knees almost failed. Graham stepped forward and caught the dog's weight before she collapsed with him. The dog growled once, low and automatic, then stopped. Not surrender. Judgment. Graham knew the difference. "All right," he said quietly. "I've got him." The woman stared at him as if she had reached the end of the world and found a man blocking the door. "Please," she rasped. "Save Atlas." "Not me. Not help us. Save Atlas." Something inside Graham went still. The old name stirred again, deep under the snow of years. Bishop. Graham pushed it down, not gently, and moved. "Inside," he said. He took most of the dog's weight and backed through the doorway. The woman staggered after them, one hand braced against the jamb, leaving a red smear where her glove had torn. Graham kicked the door shut against the storm and guided the dog onto a thick wool blanket near the kitchen table. The shepherd tried to lift his head, failed, tried again. "Easy, Atlas," the woman whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. Graham looked at her. "You're bleeding." "He's worse." "You're both bad enough." He did not soften the sentence. Softness wasted time when blood was involved. He took another blanket from the trunk by the stove and set it around her shoulders. "Name." She blinked as though the word had come from very far away. "Deputy Rowan Mercer, Bitterroot County." "Graham Voss?" "I know." That made him pause. She gave the smallest, strangest laugh, almost swallowed by a shiver. "Cha, everyone knows the man who fixes things and disappears before pie." "Pie complicates work." Her mouth twitched, then her eyes rolled slightly, and Graham caught her by the shoulder before she fell sideways. "That's enough talking." He settled Rowan into a chair close to the stove, but not too close. Heat could be a kindness or a thief, depending on how fast it came back to a frozen body. He checked her pupils, cleaned the cut at her temple, wrapped it, then pressed 2 fingers to her wrist. Fast pulse, weak but steady. Atlas made a sound, not a whine. The dog was too proud for that. It was a breath shaped by pain. Graham turned back to him. The shepherd's right hind leg trembled badly. There were cuts along the flank, a swelling near the ribs, and a tear at the upper thigh where fur was clotted with blood and snowmelt. Graham worked carefully, speaking low, not because dogs understood every word, but because they understood the weight behind them. Not touching what I don't have to, just looking. Good. Atlas watched his hands. Every inch of that dog was tired. None of him had quit. Graham had seen that before, in men, in animals, in himself on days he did not admire. He cleaned the wounds, wrapped what could be wrapped, and made a temporary splint from cedar slats and torn cloth. When his hand passed near the dog's muzzle, Atlas did not snap. He only breathed harder, eyes fixed on Graham's face. That trust was worse than suspicion. Suspicion Graham could answer. Trust came carrying ghosts. He stood, crossed to the radio shelf, and switched on the private set he used in storms when phone service gave up pretending it was useful. The line crackled, hissed, then caught. "Lillian," he said when a woman's voice answered, groggy and sharp at once. "It's Graham. I've got an injured K9 at my cabin. German Shepherd. Possible leg trauma, lacerations, maybe ribs. Handler injured too." Dr. Lillian Price did not waste time sounding surprised. "Sir, conscious?" "Both." "Bleeding controlled?" "For now." "I'll come as far as the lower track if I can get the snowcat started. Keep him warm, not hot. Don't let him stand. And Graham?" "What?" "If you say, 'I've seen worse,' I'll drive through this storm just to slap you." He looked at Atlas, then at Rowan, slumped in the chair. "I wasn't going to." "That means you were." The radio clicked off. For the first time that night, Graham exhaled fully. Rowan woke in pieces. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpened with panic. "Atlas." "He's alive," Graham said. She tried to stand. He put one hand on the back of the chair, not touching her, only making it clear the chair was staying where it was. "He's alive," he repeated. "Don't make me fix you twice." Her gaze moved past him to the blanket near the table. Atlas lay there, breathing hard but steady. My one amber eye shifted toward her. Rowan's face changed. The fear did not leave. It simply became love. "He pulled me out," she whispered. Graham sat across from her, close enough to catch her if she dropped, far enough to let pride remain standing. "From what?" She swallowed. Her throat worked painfully. "Patrol unit went off the Ridge Road, near Hollow Creek access. We were checking a water station." "In this weather?" "Automatic alert came in. pH reading wrong. Could have been a sensor freeze. Could have been nothing." Her eyes closed briefly. "Clara Dunn was with me. Environmental office. Her support vehicle lost power 2 miles back. She returned to call it in from the highway relay. Atlas and I went another quarter-mile to verify the station." Graham said nothing. People told the truth better when silence did not chase them. "We found tire tracks on a closed service road. Heavy truck, fresh. Atlas picked up something near the culvert." Rowan's fingers tightened in the blanket. "Then headlights came up behind us. Fast, too fast. I tried to reverse out, but they clipped the rear quarter. We slid. The unit rolled partway down the slope." She looked at Atlas again. "I couldn't get the door open. He did. He got out through the broken rear window and came back for me. Dragged at my sleeve until I moved. I don't remember all of it." Her voice thinned. "I remember him yelping once. Just once." Graham felt his jaw set. Just once. The proud ones always gave you only one. He stood and moved toward her wet coat, which he had hung over a chair near the stove. As he lifted it to check the pockets for identification, something flaked from the hem and fell onto the floor. Gray mud, not dark brown forest soil, not the clean mineral dirt from the lower road. This was pale and heavy with a dull sheen to it. Graham crouched and touched it with 2 fingers. Even through the smoke and wet wool in the room, he caught the faint smell. Metallic, cold, wrong. Atlas stirred. The dog raised his head, pain flashing through his body, and fixed on the coat. Slowly, with effort that made Rowan whisper his name, he dragged one forepaw forward, then another, not far, only inches, but enough to bring his nose near the mud-stained hem. He sniffed. A tremor moved through him. Then he turned his head toward the back door and gave a low, broken sound. Not a bark, not a warning. A message carried on the last rope of his strength. Graham looked from the dog to the mud, then beyond the kitchen window, where snow pressed white hands against the glass. Years ago, after the service, he had taken safety work where he could find it. Old mining sites, contaminated soil markers, places where men had dug money from the ground and left poison to keep the accounts balanced. He was no chemist. He would not pretend certainty. But he knew enough to understand one thing. That mud did not belong on a deputy's coat after a routine water station check. Rowan saw his face. "What?" she asked. Graham rubbed the mud between thumb and forefinger, watching its gray smear stain the skin. "Where exactly did you say those tracks were?" "Hollow Creek access, above the reservoir road." He rose slowly. Outside, the wind moved through the brass casings on the porch. They clicked together in the dark, small and hollow, like old bones remembering a march. Rowan reached for him then. Her hand caught the cuff of his camouflage sleeve, weak but urgent. "Don't use the town line," she said. Graham looked down. Her eyes were glassy with pain, but the fear in them had nothing to do with herself. "The relay station," she whispered. "Sawtooth Ridge. It may not be storm damage. Someone may have cut us off." The stove snapped softly behind him. Atlas lay near the table, breathing hard, the little triangle of gold fur on his chest rising and falling under Graham's rough bandage. For a moment, the cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a threshold. Graham stood between the storm outside and the wounded lives inside, feeling an old truth return with cruel patience. Doors did not ask whether a man was ready before they opened. He looked at Atlas. The dog looked back. And beneath the snow of many years, the name Bishop lifted its head like an old wolf waking in the dark. Morning did not arrive like a rescue. It came pale and slow, pushing a thin silver light through the pine branches and laying it across the cabin floor in narrow bars. Outside, the storm had not fully spent itself. Snow still moved through Bitterroot Valley in restless sheets, but the anger had gone out of it. The world looked newly washed, almost innocent. That was the cruel trick of winter, Graham thought. By daylight, it could cover every sign of what it had tried to take. The blood on the porch had already begun to freeze beneath a clean dusting of snow. Inside, the cabin held its warmth stubbornly. The stove burned low and steady. Rowan Mercer sat upright in the armchair near it, wrapped in 2 blankets, one hand pressed against the bandage at her temple, as if she could keep the headache from spreading by sheer discipline. Atlas lay on the wool blanket near the kitchen table. The German shepherd had not slept much. His eyes closed from time to time, but every shift in the cabin pulled him back. The right hind leg remained splinted. His ribs rose and fell too carefully. Pain had made him quiet, but not smaller. Even injured, he had the air of a sentry who had been ordered to stand down and disagreed with the order on moral grounds. Graham had seen officers like that, men like that. Dogs, more than anyone. A machine growled outside just after 7. Rowan turned her head too quickly and winced. Atlas lifted his muzzle an inch from the blanket. "Easy," Graham said, not sure which of them he meant. Headlights slid across the frosted window. A county snowcat crawled into view between the trees, orange hazard lights blinking through the white. Behind it came a sheriff's SUV with chains on the tires, moving with the weary confidence of a vehicle that had survived many winters and expected no applause. The first person through the door was Dr. Lillian Price. She was shorter than Graham remembered every time, maybe 5'5", wrapped in a sage-green parka with a canvas medical bag slung across her body. Snow clung to the gray-blonde hair escaping beneath her knit hat. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her eyes sharp with the practiced mercy of someone who loved animals too much to lie about them. She did not greet Graham first. She went straight to Atlas. "Well," she murmured, kneeling beside him, "you look like you argued with a mountain and refused to admit the mountain was rude." Atlas watched her. Lillian offered the back of her hand, waited, then began her exam with slow, confident movements. She spoke to the dog before she spoke to anyone else. It was one of the reasons Graham trusted her. Behind her came Sheriff Maeve Calder, stamping snow from her boots with 2 hard knocks. Maeve was in her mid-50s, broad-shouldered under a dark winter sheriff's coat, her short salt-and-pepper hair tucked beneath a practical hat. There was nothing decorative about her. Even the way she removed her gloves looked like part of an investigation. Her pale blue eyes moved from Rowan to Atlas to Graham, then to the mud-stained coat drying near the stove. "Morning," she said. "Depends who you ask," Graham replied. Maeve gave a thin look that might have been amusement if it had warmer clothes on. "You always this cheerful before breakfast?" "Only for elected officials." "I'm appointed until spring." "Then I'm being generous." From the chair, Rowan made a sound that was almost a laugh and immediately regretted it. She pressed her fingers to her temple. Maeve's expression softened without becoming gentle. "Deputy." "Sheriff." "You look terrible." "I feel worse." That's usually how terrible works. The small exchange steadied the room more than pity would have. Rowan sat a little straighter, not because she was well, but because Maeve had given her the dignity of being treated like herself. Lillian finished checking Atlas's gums, then moved her hands along his ribs. The dog's breath caught once. Rowan leaned forward sharply. "Don't," Lillian said without looking up. "If you jump up, I'll have 2 patients making bad decisions." Rowan froze. Graham liked Lillian a little more for that. The exam took time. Lillian cut away more matted fur, cleaned what Graham had only been able to stabilize, and replaced the temporary wrap with something cleaner and firmer. Atlas endured it with a silence that made the cabin feel heavy. At last, Lillian sat back on her heels. "He's lucky," she said. Rowan's face changed too quickly toward hope. Lillian saw it and did not let the hope run farther than truth allowed. "Lucky to be alive. No obvious fracture that I can feel, but I want imaging when the road's clear enough to move him safely. Soft tissue trauma in the right hind leg, bruised ribs, lacerations from rock or metal. He needs warmth, fluids, pain management, and absolute rest." "Rest for how long?" Rowan asked. "Long enough that you won't like the answer." Rowan looked at Atlas. The dog looked back, and in that look was the whole history of their partnership. The long drives, the calls in the dark, the quiet between commands, the way a dog learns a person's breathing until fear has a scent and grief has a posture. He can recover," Lillian said carefully. "But recovery and returning to full duty are not the same promise." The cabin went still. There were many kinds of silence. Graham had catalogued them over the years without meaning to. The peaceful kind after snow, the dangerous kind before violence, the lonely kind that grew in corners. This one was different. It was the silence of a woman hearing a future close one door and not yet seeing where another might be. Rowan did not cry. Graham thought that made it worse. Her eyes stayed dry, her jaw tightened, and one hand slid from the blanket to rest against her own knee, as if she did not trust herself to reach for Atlas without breaking. Maeve saved her by turning the conversation. "Tell it again," she said. "From the Alert." Rowan drew a breath, then another. Her voice was hoarse but steady enough. Hollow Creek Station sent a bad pH reading at 2014. Clara Dunn and I took the lower road. Her support vehicle lost power near mile marker 6. She turned back toward the highway relay. Atlas and I went on to verify the station because we were less than a quarter mile out. Maeve took a small black notebook from her coat pocket. She did not write much, just enough. "You saw tracks?" "Heavy truck, fresh, on the closed service road above the culvert." "Then?" "Atlas alerted near the drainage cut. I didn't get a full read. And headlights came in behind us. No siren, no warning. They clipped the unit on the rear passenger side. We slid off the ridge road, rolled part way down." Maeve's jaw tightened once. "You see the vehicle?" "Not clearly. Large front end. White or light gray. Could have been a plow rig. Could have been a utility truck." Graham moved to the counter and picked up the small glass jar he had filled before dawn. Inside, the gray mud sat against the bottom like a dirty secret. "This was on her coat," he said. Maeve looked at it. Lillian, still beside Atlas, glanced up. "That from the road?" "No," Graham said. "Not any normal road near here." Maeve took the jar, but did not open it. "You know that because?" "Worked old mine recovery sites after I got out. Safety contracts, soil marking, containment perimeters." He nodded at the jar. "I'm not calling it evidence. I'm saying it smells like metal, an old runoff." Rowan's eyes moved to him. There was surprise there, but not suspicion. She had begun building a map of him in her mind and had just discovered another road. Maeve capped the moment before it turned personal. "Sawtooth relay went down at 2031, she said. "County log says ice load took it out." "That happen often?" Graham asked. "In bad storms, sure. But not usually 20 minutes after a deputy reports a water anomaly," Rowan said. "No," Maeve replied. Not usually." The words did not dramatize themselves. They did not need to. In a small county, timing could wear a mask, but it still left footprints. Maeve closed her notebook. "Tech crew can't get up Sawtooth until the wind drops. If it's just weather, we'll know. If somebody cut power or pulled the backup fuse, we'll know that too." Rowan shifted under the blankets. "I need to go back to Hollow Creek." "No," 3 voices said at once. Graham, Maeve, and Lillian looked at one another. Atlas gave a faint huff, as if approving the sudden outbreak of wisdom. Rowan glared at all of them in turn. "There may be contamination reaching the reservoir. Someone ran us off the road." If they're moving again." "You have a concussion," Lillian said. "A mild one." "Mild is what people call it right before they fall over." "My dog is hurt because I kept going." That sentence did more damage than if she had shouted. It came out stripped bare, without uniform or rank. Lillian looked down at Atlas, then back at Rowan. "Your dog is alive because he did his job. You are alive because he loves you. Those are not the same as blame." Rowan's mouth tightened. Graham turned away before the words found him too directly. Too late. Because he had heard another version of that sentence years ago, after Bishop. Different place, different people, same useless mercy. A dog did not blame you. That was the terrible holiness of them. They could carry your mistakes in their bodies and still look at you as if you were worth following. He set another log in the stove harder than necessary. Maeve noticed. She noticed everything and made a profession of not commenting until it helped. Graham straightened. "She stays here." Rowan's eyes flashed. "You don't give me orders." "No, your sheriff does. Your doctor should. Common sense tried, but you didn't answer the door." Maeve's eyebrow lifted. Rowan stared at him, offended enough to look more alive. "Do you talk to everyone like this?" "Only people trying to save the county by collapsing in my kitchen?" Lillian made a small sound that might have been a cough-hiding laughter. For one bright second, the room's fear loosened its teeth. Then Atlas tried to rise. It happened slowly and terribly. His front paws pushed against the blanket. His shoulders trembled. Pain ran through him so visibly that Rowan whispered his name like a prayer. Lillian reached to steady him, but Atlas was not trying to stand fully. He was trying to get to Rowan's coat. The mud-stained hem still hung near the stove. So Graham stepped toward it, but Atlas dragged himself 2 inches, then 3, nose working. His breath shook. He reached the coat, sniffed the gray smear, and froze. No growl, no bark. He turned his head toward the cabin's back door. The entire room watched him. For the first time that morning, even Maeve's practical face changed. Not into belief in miracles. None of them needed that. Dogs did not perform magic. They remembered the world through scent with a devotion humans could barely imagine. Graham crouched, took the coat gently away, and carried the mud-stained hem closer to the table. Atlas followed it with his eyes, but did not try to move again. "That's enough," Graham said softly. Atlas stared at him. This time, the dog listened. Graham placed a small sample into another clean jar, labeling it with Rowan's name, the date, and the location as best as he knew it. His handwriting was square and plain. Maeve watched him write. "You said old runoff." "I said it could be." "From where?" "Hollow Creek has clay pockets, but that gray sheen—" He paused, choosing accuracy over drama. "There's an old settling area upstream, left over from mining days, sealed off supposedly. If someone were dumping something they didn't want seen, winter would make a fine curtain." Rowan's face sharpened. Pain receded behind purpose. "Then we go." "You don't," Graham said. "I'm not asking permission." "No, you're ignoring reality." Her eyes burned. "People south of that reservoir drink that water. And if you fall in the snow before you reach the tree line, you'll purify it by dying dramatically?" Maeve sighed. "Voss." "What?" Try not to sound like a shovel hitting a coffin. Otis would have appreciated that line, Graham thought, against his will. Rowan did not. She pushed herself halfway out of the chair, and the room tilted her immediately. Graham caught her elbow before she hit the floor. She tried to pull away, but her strength had already betrayed her. For a moment they were very close, the injured deputy with stubborn amber-brown eyes, and the man who had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of human nearness. "You can hate resting," he said quietly. "Do it anyway." Her anger faltered then, not because it was gone, but because exhaustion broke through it. She looked past him to Atlas. The dog had laid his head down again, watching her from the blanket. "I got him hurt," she whispered. Graham released her elbow once she was steady in the chair. "No," he said. "You don't know that." He did not answer right away. The truth rose in him like cold water. "I know what it is to spend years trying to put a dog's blood back where it belongs." "All right," but the room did not need that confession, not yet. So he said only, "I know blame makes a poor doctor." Rowan looked at him then, really looked. Maybe she heard what he did not say. Maybe Atlas did. The day moved in slow, necessary pieces after that. Lillian gave Atlas medication and instructions sharp enough to nail to the wall. No standing, no stairs. Small amounts of water. Warmth, not overheating. If his breathing changed, call. If the swelling worsened, call. If Graham decided to improvise because he had once treated something in a desert, call before making it worse. Maeve left to check the station logs, the Sawtooth Relay Report, and the permit records for traffic through Hollow Creek access. Before she stepped out, she paused beside Graham on the porch, where snow had softened the blood but not hidden it completely. "You don't have to involve yourself," she said. "Good. But you already are." He looked at the tree line. Maeve followed his gaze. "You still think helping ends when the wood is stacked?" "I think law enforcement has enough people wearing badges." "And not enough people who know that old trail system." He said nothing. Maeve's voice lowered, not softer, only more precise. "I'm not asking you to be what you were. I'm asking you to be the man who knows this mountain. That man keeps to himself. That man opened the door last night." The wind moved through the brass casings above the porch. Their hollow clicking filled the space between them. Maeve left before he could answer, which was one of her more irritating talents. By evening, the cabin had settled into a new rhythm. Rowan dozed and woke and pretended she had not been asleep. Lillian radioed twice. Graham changed Atlas's water, checked the splint, and kept the fire at an even burn. Outside, the storm brushed the cabin with softer hands. Inside, the dog's breathing became the clock by which everyone measured hope. Near midnight, Rowan finally slept deeply enough that her face lost its guarded shape. Graham sat on the floor beside Atlas. He did not touch him at first. He only rested his hand palm down on the boards a few inches from the dog's muzzle. A choice offered, not demanded. Atlas watched him for a long time. Then, slowly, with the dignity of a king granting mercy to a nervous servant, the German shepherd lowered his head until his chin rested on the back of Graham's hand. The contact was warm, heavier than it should have been. Graham stared at the fire until it blurred. There was no forgiveness in the gesture. Dogs did not think in such ceremonial terms. There was only trust, immediate and undeserved, arriving without paperwork or warning. Sometimes a creature did not ask a man to save the world. Sometimes it only asked him not to pull his hand away. Graham did not. The radio cracked just after dawn began to gray the windows. Maeve's voice came through, rough with static. "Voss, you awake?" Graham looked at Rowan, still asleep, then at Atlas, whose chin remained on his hand. "Unfortunately, got 2 calls from the south end. Wells tasting metallic. One from the Kincaid place, one from a rental near Hollow Creek Road." Graham closed his eyes. Maeve continued. "And Silas Trent filed a permit late last night. Emergency transport. Says he's moving heating units and winter relief equipment through the upper service route tomorrow before the next storm." Across the room, Rowan opened her eyes. Atlas lifted his head. The cabin, for all its warmth, suddenly felt very small against the valley outside. Graham reached for the radio. "Send me the route," he said. Bitterroot Valley looked almost harmless in the morning. The storm had stepped back, leaving the town polished and bright under a quilt of clean snow. Roof lines wore soft white caps. Fence rails glittered in the weak sun. Smoke lifted from chimneys in slow blue strands, and the windows of June Pritchard's diner glowed like little squares of butter against the cold. Graham Voss drove into town behind Sheriff Maeve Calder's SUV, keeping a careful distance on the packed snow. He had not wanted to come. That was not the same as thinking he should stay away. There were things a man could refuse out loud while his hands were already reaching for his coat. Rowan had remained at the cabin under Lillian Price's strict orders, though "remained" was a generous word for the way she sat by the stove, with the expression of a hawk trapped in someone's laundry room. Atlas had been awake when Graham left, head lifted just enough to watch him pull on his field jacket. The dog had not whined. That might have been easier. He had simply watched, as if assigning Graham a duty no one had spoken. Graham still felt that gaze between his shoulder blades. Town was already moving. A man shoveled the sidewalk in front of the post office. 2 women in thick parkas carried grocery bags to a pickup. Someone had tied a red scarf around the neck of the carved wooden bear outside the feed store, giving the animal a festive dignity it had not requested. Bitterroot was the kind of place where people waved through windshields even when they were suspicious of you. Sometimes, especially then. Maeve parked beside the county annex, a squat brick building with a flag snapping hard in the wind. Graham stepped out and looked across the street, toward the diner. Through the window he could see the usual gathering of winter survivors. Road crew, ranch hands, retired men with opinions large enough to need their own table. Maeve caught him looking. "Coffee first," she said. "That an order?" "It's a bribe. You're less unpleasant with coffee." "I've heard no evidence." "I've collected years of it." They crossed the street. Inside the diner, warmth and noise met them with equal force. The bell above the door rang. The air smelled of bacon grease, cinnamon, wet wool, and old coffee that had been forgiven for many sins because it was hot. June Pritchard stood behind the counter, small and brisk, silver hair pinned up with a pencil. She gave Graham one glance and pointed at the ceiling. "Roof didn't leak." "Good. You want pie?" "No." She slid a mug toward him anyway. "Then drink coffee and work up to becoming human." Maeve took the stool beside him. "He's appointed himself difficult today." "He was born that way," June said. "Some babies cry." Graham probably inspected the crib. A few men at the end of the counter chuckled. Graham stared into his mug as if the coffee might offer legal counsel. Across the room, Otis Bellamy was fighting a zipper on his orange work jacket and losing with theatrical bitterness. He was a stout man with a silver mustache, oil permanently darkened into the lines of his hands, and the expression of someone who had been disappointed by machinery so often it had become a marriage. He dropped onto the stool on Graham's other side. "If you're here, either something's broken or about to be," Otis said. "Morning to you, too." "Don't start with manners. Makes a man nervous." Maeve placed a folder on the counter between them. "We're asking about vehicles on Hollow Creek Access. Closed service road. Last night." Otis's humor thinned, not gone, only set aside. "That where Rowan went off?" Maeve did not answer directly. "You hear anything?" "In this town? I hear too much and trust half." Otis rubbed his jaw. "Road crew said Trent's boys had equipment staged near the upper route. Supposed to be relief heaters, generator housings, that sort of thing." Graham looked at him. "Trent's boys." "Silas Trent." Otis said the name in the careful way people spoke of someone popular enough to make criticism expensive. "Man's got half the town convinced he invented winter kindness." Maeve opened the folder. 5 years ago, he did haul generators through the ice storm." "He did," Otis admitted, "and folks remember. Hard not to like a man who brings light when your pipes are freezing." "But?" Graham asked. Otis leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Good men usually don't remind you they're good every time they buy coffee." The bell over the diner door rang again. Conversation shifted, not stopping, but changing direction like wind around a barn. Silas Trent entered as if the room had expected him. He was broad, well-kept, and handsome in a polished, late middle-aged way. His charcoal wool coat looked too clean for the weather. His boots had seen snow, but not much mud. Silver touched his blonde-brown hair at the temples in a manner that seemed almost arranged. He smiled before anyone greeted him, a wide, generous smile that reached the room faster than his eyes did. "June," he called, "put the road crew's breakfast on my account." A cheer rose from the far table. Silas lifted a gloved hand, accepting gratitude with practiced embarrassment. Then he noticed Maeve. Then Graham. If the smile changed, it did so only underneath. "Sheriff," he said. "Graham Voss." "The kindest hermit in Montana." Otis muttered into his cup. "That's a crowded pageant." Graham did not smile. Silas crossed to them, bringing with him a clean scent of cedar cologne and expensive wool. "Heard about Deputy Mercer. Terrible thing. Roads were vicious last night. Anything I can do, Maeve, you say the word." "We're checking vehicle activity around Hollow Creek," Maeve said. "Of course." Silas placed one hand over his heart lightly, as though wounded by the idea that anyone would not cooperate. "My permits are clean. We've got emergency heating units moving before the next storm. Shelters, church basement, some outlying rentals." "You know how it is?" "I know how paperwork is," Maeve replied. "It gets lonely if nobody reads it." Silas laughed. Too loud, Graham thought, not because joy was suspicious, because there was a half-second before it, a little room where calculation took a breath. A second man stood near the door, almost unnoticed. Wesley Trent did not share his brother's warmth. He was leaner, narrower, dressed in a black trucker coat with a gray hood pulled low, a ring of keys clipped to his belt. His face was long and pale from too many indoor nights and too little conscience, though Graham reminded himself that a man's face was not evidence. Wesley's eyes moved around the diner without resting on anyone for long. They stopped once on Graham's boots, then on the folder, then away. Maeve asked Silas 3 more questions about the route. He answered all of them smoothly. Yes, Upper Service Road. Yes, emergency request filed late because weather windows changed. Yes, Wesley had checked the trucks himself. Yes, he hated to use that road, but if people needed heat, a man did what he had to do. Every answer sounded reasonable. That was the trouble. A lie told badly insulted the listener. A lie told well invited them to sit down and be grateful. Graham took his coffee and stood. Maeve looked at him. "Where?" "Annex." "Good. Try not to interrogate anyone with your face." "My face is off duty." Otis snorted. At the annex, they met Clara Dunn in a cramped records office that smelled faintly of paper dust and peppermint tea. Clara was 44, narrow-shouldered, with dark hair cut blunt at her jaw and glasses that kept sliding down her nose because she pushed them up too often. She wore a county environmental services fleece over a turtleneck, and her hands moved anxiously around a stack of printouts, as if the numbers might scatter if not protected. "I should have stayed with Rowan," she said before anyone accused her. Maeve shut the door. "Nobody said that." "I know nobody said it. And that doesn't mean nobody thought it." Graham leaned against the wall, arms folded. Clara glanced at him, then away, unsure whether his silence was judgment or furniture. "It was supposed to be a sensor check," she continued. "Hollow Creek Station sent abnormal pH, then conductivity spiked. Could be ice interference, could be probe fouling. I've seen stranger readings from a frozen sensor." "But you went out," Maeve said, "because it repeated twice." Clara handed over the first sheet. "There, 814, then 819. The system tried to send a full packet after that, but the data corrupted before completion." Graham studied the graph, and the line rose where it should have rested calm. "What sits upstream?" he asked. Clara pushed her glasses up again. "Officially, nothing active. Old mining drainage, capped settling ponds, sealed access tunnels, all mapped, all monitored, supposedly." Maeve heard the word. "Supposedly." Clara looked miserable. "The seal work was done before I took this job. The reports are clean, but old clean reports have a way of staying clean because no one wants to pay to make them honest again." That sentence stayed in the room. Graham thought of Atlas lowering his nose to gray mud, thought of Rowan's voice saying, "Someone cut us off." thought of a valley waking under sunlight while something sour moved beneath its snowpack. Clara spread out an old topographic map. Her fingertip traced a thin blue line. If runoff entered here, it wouldn't hit the reservoir immediately. Snowpack would slow visible spread, but during a thaw, even a short one, it could carry through these feeder channels. "When's the next thaw?" Maeve asked. "Tomorrow afternoon, maybe. Forecast says a warm wind before the next front." Maeve closed her eyes for half a second. Graham looked at the map, then at a narrow line almost hidden beneath older markings. "That trail still open?" Clara squinted. "Miller's Cut? I thought that was gone." "Not gone," Graham said. "Just ignored." A sound came from the hallway. Keys, not loud. Just a brief metal jangle. Graham turned. Through the frosted glass of the office door, a shadow moved away. Maeve opened it fast. The hallway was empty except for a wet footprint near the baseboard and the echo of the outer door closing. Clara went pale. Was someone listening? Maeve looked down at the footprint, then at Graham. Graham did not need to answer. Outside, across the street, Wesley Trent stood beside a white utility truck, one hand resting near the keys at his belt. He did not look toward the annex. That, more than anything, made Graham certain he knew exactly where they were. Maeve stepped back into the office, her voice low. "Nobody says Miller's Cut again in public." Clara swallowed. "Sheriff?" "You did nothing wrong," Maeve said. "But from now on, you send copies of all readings to my private county address and Lillian Price's clinic account." "Lillian's?" Maeve's mouth barely curved. Nobody thinks to subpoena a veterinarian before lunch. Graham almost smiled. Almost. By early afternoon, Graham returned to the diner alone, while Maeve stayed at the annex. He wanted one more look at the town before going back to the cabin, though he would have called it buying bread if anyone asked. It was easier to admit hunger than concern. Silas was still there, standing near the road crew table, telling a story that made men laugh with their whole bodies. He looked like comfort. That was the danger of him. He had wrapped himself in old gratitude until suspicion seemed rude. Wesley came in from the cold and passed close behind Graham. "Careful in the woods, Voss," he said quietly. Graham did not turn. "You giving trail advice now?" "Winter makes people vanish, even locals." There it was, not a threat big enough to report, not a confession, just a small dark stone placed in the path. Graham turned then. Wesley's eyes were pale, almost colorless in the diner light. His mouth did not move toward a smile. "I've been lost in worse places than Montana," Graham said. Otis, who had appeared with the stealth of a man following gossip by smell, cleared his throat. "If you two are fixing to see who's scarier, take it outside. June mopped this morning, and I'd hate to slip on all that masculine fog." A few nearby heads turned. Wesley stepped back first, not because he was afraid, but because public scenes did not suit him. Silas called his name from the counter, cheerful as a church bell. "Wes, come help me load those invoices." Wesley walked away. Otis watched him go. "That one's got all the warmth of a shovel in January." Graham looked at Silas, who was laughing again. "And the brother?" Otis sighed. "Silas? Folks remember what he did in the ice storm. Hard to turn gratitude into suspicion. Makes a man feel ungrateful. Maybe gratitude should have an expiration date." "No," Otis said, surprising him. "But it ought to come with inspections." Graham glanced at him. Otis shrugged, embarrassed by his own wisdom. "Don't look at me like that. I'm still mostly nonsense." Graham bought bread, canned peaches, and a bag of dog treats. June insisted on adding without charge. When he tried to pay, she swatted his hand with a receipt pad. "For the deputy's dog," she said, "and don't make that face." It'll crack in the cold. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The road wound through bright snow and black pine, beautiful enough to make a man distrust beauty. Graham passed the turnoff toward Hollow Creek and slowed without meaning to. No tire tracks showed from the main road. The new snow had made liars of everything. When he reached the cabin, Rowan was asleep in the chair, one hand still near the whistle at her throat. The fire had burned low, but steady. Lillian had left a note on the table in sharp block letters. Atlas rested. Do not let him con you. He will try. Graham read it twice, then looked at the blanket. Atlas was not on it. For one cold second, Graham's mind emptied. Then he saw the dog near the mudroom door. Atlas had not gone far. He could not have, but somehow, with stubborn, painful inches, he had dragged Rowan's spare towel from the laundry basket. The towel still carried a faint gray stain from the coat Graham had cleaned the night before. Now it lay beside Graham's winter boots, not hidden, placed. Atlas rested next to it, breathing hard, eyes half-lidded, but focused on Graham with the solemn patience of a creature who had made his argument and expected humans to catch up eventually. Graham stood very still. Rowan woke behind him. What did he do? Graham looked at the towel, then at the boots, then at Atlas. The dog gave one slow blink. No miracle, no command. No ghost speaking through fur and bone. Just a wounded working dog, reduced to almost nothing but memory and loyalty, saying in the only language left to him, "The road is still there." Graham lowered the groceries onto the table. Then carefully he picked up his boots and set them by the stove to dry. He did not put them away. By noon, the light over Bitterroot Valley had turned almost beautiful, not warm. Montana was not in the habit of apologizing that quickly, but bright enough that the snow seemed to glow from within, as if the whole valley had been carved from bone and glass. The pines behind Graham's cabin held their white burdens with monk-like patience. Every branch looked peaceful. Rowan Mercer hated it. Peace had no business looking that clean when Atlas was lying on a blanket by the stove, drugged enough to rest, but not enough to stop watching every movement in the room. Sheriff Maeve Calder stood by Graham's kitchen table with a folded map spread beneath both hands. Doctor? Lillian Price had taken over the corner nearest Atlas, her medical bag open, her sage-green parka hanging from the back of a chair. Lillian had the calm of a woman who had wrestled injured horses, frightened dogs, and stubborn humans long enough to know which species complained most. Humans, usually. Maeve tapped the map once. "I'm asking officially." Graham stood across from her, arms folded, his olive-drab combat shirt visible beneath his open field jacket. The camouflage sleeves were rolled halfway down, the faded bands at the biceps catching the firelight. His face gave away little, but Rowan had begun to notice that his silence came in different shapes. Just this one was refusal, trying to become duty. "As what?" he asked. "Civilian guide, nothing more. You know Miller's cut. My deputies don't. Clara says the old service maps are unreliable, past the upper bend." Unreliable is kind. They're fiction with contour lines. Maeve did not smile. "Then I need someone who knows what the map forgot." Rowan pushed herself higher in the chair. "I'm going." "No," Graham said. "You didn't even look at me." "I didn't need to." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "That's not how decisions work. It is when the decision is whether a concussed deputy hikes into old mining runoff during winter." Maeve leaned back slightly, letting them collide without stepping between too soon. Rowan turned to her. "Sheriff." Maeve's face stayed firm. "You are off field duty until Lillian clears you." "Maeve." That wasn't a discussion wearing a friendly coat. Lillian, checking Atlas's bandage, added without looking up. And before anyone tries to appoint Atlas as emotional support for bad ideas, he is not moving from this room. Atlas opened one eye, as if offended by the accuracy. Rowan looked down at him. The argument drained from her face, leaving something more fragile. Atlas had spent years beside her, reading her body before she spoke, turning toward danger before she named it. Now he lay still, because everyone in the room had decided that love meant denying him the thing he had been trained to do. That, Graham thought, was one of life's crueler lessons. Sometimes protecting a protector looked exactly like betrayal. "I'll stay," Rowan said at last, though the words sounded like they had scraped her throat on the way out. "But if you find anything—" "You'll know," Maeve said. Graham reached for his gloves. "One condition." Maeve gave him a dry look. "You're very fond of those for a man who doesn't want to be involved." "Atlas stays quiet. No stares, no following sounds, no proving anything." Lillian pointed at him approvingly. "Finally, a man in this cabin says something medically useful." Rowan's mouth twitched despite herself. The small, almost laugh did not fix anything, but it made the room less brittle. They left Atlas with Rowan and Lillian, and Graham led Maeve and Clara Dunn into the white afternoon. Clara had arrived bundled in a county-issue parka, too large for her narrow shoulders, her glasses fogging every time she breathed into her scarf. She carried a hard sampling case in one hand and a tablet sealed in a plastic weather cover in the other. She looked like someone who would rather be in a lab and knew the lab could no longer save anyone by itself. They took snowmobiles for the first mile and a half, following the lower timber road until the trees closed tighter and the drifts rose high enough to swallow the old track. From there, Graham signaled them off. "Walk from here." Clara stared ahead at the unbroken snow. "There's a trail?" There was. That's not comforting. Trails don't need comfort. They need memory. Maeve adjusted the strap on her rifle, not theatrically, just making sure it would not snag. Lead. Miller's Cut had not been meant for tourists. It had been made by men with saws, horses, bad coffee, and no interest in scenery. Decades had softened it. Young firs had grown where wagons once passed. Snow had rounded the old ruts and covered the broken stones. But Graham saw the trail the way some men heard a half-forgotten song, a lean in the trees, a notch in a stump, a drainage dip where the snow sagged differently. The forest was bright enough to hurt the eyes. Sunlight scattered across the snow in small, blinding shards. Every breath smoked. Above them, the sky opened in cold blue pieces between the clouds. Clara stopped once to photograph ice crystals along a rusted length of cable fence, then caught herself and flushed. "Sorry, habit." Maeve looked at the crystals. "They evidence?" "No, just pretty." "Then take the picture. World's allowed to be pretty while people behave badly." Graham kept walking, but the sentence stayed with him. Closer to Hollow Creek, the beauty began to change, not vanish. That would have been easier. Instead, it developed flaws. A patch of snow near a fallen log had a faint gray cast beneath its crust. A scatter of deer tracks approached the creek bed, then veered away sharply. On the bark of a pine, 3 feet above the ground, a smear of pale mud marked where something had brushed past. Clara crouched near it, opened her case, and took a sample with gloved precision. Her hands shook only after she sealed the vial. "This matches the color from Rowan's coat." "Could be road clay," Maeve said. Clara looked at the tree line, then back at the smear. Road clay usually has the manners to stay on roads. They pressed on. The old mining drainage lay beyond a shallow rise where the trees thinned. It did not look like much at first, a low concrete structure half buried in snow. A rusted gate, warning signs faded by years of weather. Someone had wired the gate shut long ago. Someone else had cut that wire recently and twisted it back into place badly. Maeve photographed it before touching anything. Graham stood still, listening. The forest had gone quiet in a way that did not belong to peace. No birds fussing in the branches, no squirrels scolding, only wind moving softly over the snow. Then he saw the pipe, not at the gate, not where a careless man would place it. 50 yards downslope, black plastic tubing lay hidden beneath cut pine boughs, its color nearly lost in shadow. One end disappeared beneath the crusted snow, near the old drainage channel. The other ran toward a feeder stream that would eventually meet Hollow Creek. Clara saw it and made a sound so small, Graham almost missed it. "Oh, no," Maeve's voice hardened. "How bad?" Clara moved carefully, taking photographs before kneeling. She lifted one pine bough with 2 fingers. Beneath it, the snow had melted and refrozen in a dirty shell around the tubing. A gray film clung to the ice. "I can't tell you concentration without testing," Clara said. "I can't tell you source without lab work, but nobody runs hidden tubing from a sealed drainage site into a feeder stream because they're watering flowers." Maeve's jaw worked once. Graham looked down the slope. The feeder stream was mostly covered, but here and there water moved under glassy ice, dark and patient. It made almost no sound. That was the obscenity of it. A bullet announced itself. Fire made light. Poison could travel politely beneath snow, quiet as a priest carrying bad news. Clara took samples from the tubing, the snowmelt, and the stream edge. Maeve documented the location and the cut wire. Graham walked the perimeter. He did not want to find more. That, he had learned in life, had no effect on whether more existed. Near the old fence line, half buried where snow had drifted against a post, something dark caught his eye. He crouched and brushed snow away with the edge of his glove. A strip of leather, not old, not trash. He lifted it carefully. It was part of a secondary K9 harness strap, torn at one end, the metal ring warped where it had caught and twisted. Several coarse black and gold hairs clung to the leather. On the edge of a nearby fence post, Graham saw the faint scrape where something heavy had slammed sideways. For a moment, the forest narrowed. The bright snow, the hidden pipe, Clara's careful breathing behind him, Maeve's boots crunching closer, all of it moved away. He saw Atlas in the dark, not as he had been by the stove, wounded and still, but in motion, pulling Rowan from the wreck, catching the scent, moving toward the drainage, then stopping, refusing forward, gripping fabric or belt or sleeve, throwing his body against her path because the danger ahead had no face and no footsteps, only air that smelled wrong. Then pain, fence, rock, metal, one yelp. Just once. Graham closed his hand around the strap. Maeve stopped beside him. "Is that Atlas?" Clara, pale already from the pipe, looked like the last bit of warmth had left her. "He was here?" Graham nodded. Maeve's voice lowered. "Rowan said he pulled her out after the crash." "He did more than that." The words came out rougher than he intended. Maeve studied his face, but did not press. That was why she was good at her job. They finished documenting the site and left the way they came, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Graham kept the strap sealed in an evidence bag Maeve gave him, though holding it through plastic felt wrong. Too clean for what it meant. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun had begun to slide behind the pines. Rowan stood when she saw their faces. Lillian immediately said, "Sit down." Rowan ignored her. "What did you find?" Maeve set the samples on the table. Clara stayed near the door, as if ashamed to bring bad news into a warm place. Graham held up the evidence bag. Rowan recognized the strap before he spoke. All the strength left her expression. "No," she said, though no one had accused the world of asking permission. Graham told it plainly. The drainage, the hidden tubing, the gray melt, the torn strap near the fence. He did not add what he imagined, but Rowan understood anyway. Perhaps she had already known in some part of herself that Atlas had not been injured merely by the crash. She crossed the room slowly and lowered herself beside him. Atlas lifted his head. Rowan touched the torn edge of the harness strap through the plastic bag, then let her hand fall to the dog's neck. Her fingers sank into his thick fur. "I thought I saved you by getting you out," she whispered. "And you were still saving me." Atlas blinked at her. His tail moved once against the blanket. That almost undid her. "I'm sorry," Rowan said, and this time the words were not sharp with guilt. They were small. Human. "I'm so sorry, partner." Atlas stretched his muzzle forward and licked the back of her hand. It was not dramatic. It was not absolution written in thunder. It was only a dog answering sorrow with the simplest truth he had. "I am here." Graham turned toward the window. He had no right to feel relieved, no right to feel pierced by another person's forgiveness. Still, the sight went through him like a blade warmed in fire. Rowan looked up at him. Her eyes were wet now, but steady. "You knew?" He did not pretend not to understand. "I guessed." "Because of Bishop?" The name crossed the room softly. Lillian looked up but said nothing. Maeve, who had heard fragments over the years and never asked more than she was given, watched Graham with quiet attention. Graham could have shut the door. He had shut many. Instead, he sat on the edge of the hearth, elbows on his knees, the firelight catching the gray in his hair. "Bishop was a military working dog," he said. "Not mine, officially. They never are, not in the way people think. But he worked with my team near the end." Atlas rested his chin back on the blanket, eyes on Graham. He trusted commands like they were weather, something fixed, something that wouldn't fail him. Graham rubbed one thumb over the scar near his chin. "Last operation before I got out, I gave the right order. That's what the report said. Pull back, regroup, avoid losing more lives." His voice stayed even. That made it harder. "Bishop was on the far side of a collapsed wall when we withdrew. Handler went back for him. We all tried. Too much fire. Too much debris. We got him out too late." No one moved. The stove clicked softly. "For years people told me it wasn't my fault." Graham looked at Atlas. They were probably right. Didn't help much. Rowan's voice was very quiet. "Atlas doesn't blame me." "No." "Bishop didn't blame you either." Graham closed his eyes briefly. Outside, a branch dropped snow with a soft rush. Before he could answer, the radio on the shelf snapped with static. "Graham?" Otis's voice came through, strained beneath its usual gravel. "You there?" Graham stood and crossed the room. "Go." "Had a truck slow near your lower track 20 minutes back. White utility, no county marks. I was coming up to drop spare fuel like an idiot with charitable disease. Saw somebody near your backside. They lit out when I came around." Graham's body changed before his face did. Maeve reached for her coat. Rowan pushed up from the floor, but Lillian caught her shoulder. Otis continued. "Didn't get inside, far as I could tell. But your woodshed's scorched, and somebody pried at the tool room door. Figured you'd want to know before pretending this is none of your business." Graham looked toward the mudroom. The small door to the back hall stood partly open. Atlas was no longer on the center blanket. For the second time that week, fear moved through Graham without sound. He crossed the room fast. Atlas lay in the narrow hall before the little storage room where Lillian had placed the medication kit and the sealed samples. He had dragged himself there inch by painful inch. His breathing was rough, his eyes were fixed on the back door. Guarding, still guarding. Graham knelt beside him. This time he did not hover his hand nearby and let the dog choose. This time he set his palm against Atlas's neck, firm and certain, feeling the life there, the pulse, the heat, the stubborn, holy weight of a creature who did not know how to stop loving his duty. Then Graham bent forward and rested his forehead against the dog's head. "Not today," he whispered. "Nobody leaves you behind today." Atlas exhaled. Rowan stood in the hallway behind him, one hand over her mouth. Lillian said something under her breath that might have been a prayer or a medical insult aimed at all brave fools. Maeve checked the back door and then stepped onto the porch. Graham followed. The cabin still stood in its bright winter clearing, but it had been touched. The woodshed bore a black scorch mark along one side, ugly against the snow. The tool-room lock had been bent. Beneath a stone on the porch rail sat a folded piece of paper, dry because someone had placed it there after the snow eased. Graham picked it up. The handwriting was blocky, hard-pressed. "Don't turn this forest into your war." Maeve read it over his shoulder. For a moment, Graham listened to the brass casings above the porch click in the wind. Once he had locked his door to keep the world out. Then he had opened it for Rowan and Atlas. Now the world had come anyway, leaving smoke on his woodpile and threats beneath stones. He folded the note once. Then he stepped inside, closed the door, and slid the bolt home. Not like a man hiding, like a man marking the edge of what he would defend. The note on Graham's porch did what threats often did in small towns. It did not silence anyone. It made the right people quieter. By morning, Sheriff Maeve Calder had turned Graham's kitchen table into a temporary command post. The cabin still smelled faintly of smoke from the scorched woodshed, but the windows were bright with winter light, and the fire inside the stove held steady. Outside, the pines stood patient under their white robes, as if they had seen men threaten one another for 100 years and had yet to be impressed. Maeve laid out photographs from Hollow Creek, permit copies, Clara Dunn's first sample notes, and the folded threat from the porch. Yet she did not dramatize any of it. Maeve believed drama was what people used when they did not have facts. "We move wrong," she said, and Silas walks away clean. Rowan sat at the table in one of Graham's old wool sweaters, pale but sharper than the day before. A bruise had darkened near her jaw. The cut at her temple was covered neatly. She looked like a woman held in place by medical orders and pure resentment. "Then we don't move wrong," she said. Lillian Price, seated on the floor beside Atlas, gave a dry little laugh. "Wonderful. Law enforcement has discovered strategy." Atlas lay with his head on his paws, watching the room. Lillian had rewrapped his leg that morning and scolded him in 3 separate tones for having dragged himself down the hall the day before. Atlas had received the scolding with solemn eyes and no visible regret. Graham stood near the stove, one shoulder against the wall. He did not sit. Sitting would have made him look like part of the meeting. He was, unfortunately, part of the meeting. Maeve tapped a pen on the map. "Clara gets more water samples from the feeder channels. Quietly, no county truck, if she can avoid it. Lillian, I need your notes on the mud and debris from Atlas's coat and fur. Not conclusions, observations." Lillian nodded. "Observations I can do. If anyone asks me to pretend veterinary medicine is a crime lab, I'll bite them." "Rowan," Maeve continued, "you review the emergency transport permits, weights, and listed equipment. If Trent's moving heating units, the math should behave." "The math usually lies less than people," Rowan said. Graham glanced at her. She had said it without bitterness. That was worse in a way. It meant experience had carved the sentence before she ever spoke it. Maeve looked at Graham. "You and Otis compare repair records. Tire changes, axle work, mud damage. Anything that says those trucks have been somewhere they claim not to be." Graham frowned. "Otis keeps records?" He keeps grudges, receipts, and 4 kinds of bolts no longer manufactured. That sounds like Otis. From the floor, Atlas gave a slow sigh, as if humans had finally begun using their noses poorly, but their brains somewhat adequately. For the next several hours, the valley's ordinary people did ordinary things that, together, began to resemble resistance. Clara Dunn did not drive a marked county vehicle. She borrowed her cousin's old Subaru, a pale green thing with a cracked bumper and a rosary on the mirror, and collected water samples from 3 feeder channels south of Hollow Creek. She moved with nervous precision, labeling each vial twice, speaking into a recorder so her timeline could not be easily questioned later. At the clinic, Lillian photographed the gray residue taken from Atlas's fur and the torn harness strap. She measured the distance between the abrasion marks and the damaged metal ring, not because she thought herself a detective, but because no one had the right to say a dog's pain was vague. Rowan sat at Graham's table with a county laptop, a stack of printed permits, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She read shipping weights until her eyes watered. Every so often she reached down and touched Atlas's shoulder, not to comfort him exactly, but to remind herself that he was still warm. The listed cargo did not add up. Emergency heaters had weight ranges. Generator housings had dimensions. Insulation pallets took space. The Trent manifests looked clean at first glance, but when Rowan compared item counts to gross vehicle weights, several loads were too heavy by hundreds of pounds. Not enough for a casual clerk to flag in a snow emergency. Enough for someone looking because a dog had bled on Graham's porch. Graham went to Otis Bellamy's shop after noon. The place sat at the edge of town beneath a sign that read Bellamy Farm and Diesel, though half the letters had lost their paint, and one corner leaned as if tired of advertising. Inside, the shop smelled of motor oil, cold iron, and coffee that had been brewed with the moral support of resentment. Otis stood under the raised hood of a loader, wearing grease on his face like war paint and a knitted cap with a hole above one ear. "I'm not helping," he said when Graham walked in. "You're holding a folder." "That's unrelated." "It says Trent Fleet on it." Otis looked down at the folder as if betrayed by paper. Nosy thing. Graham waited. Otis shoved the folder at him. "Wesley brought 2 trucks in last week, said they'd been running paved routes. That was a lie so lazy it should have been taxed." Graham opened the folder. "Why?" "Deep lug mud tires, not snow highway tread, mud packed inside the undercarriage, gray, ugly, smelled like a battery got buried in wet clay." Graham looked up. Otis scratched his mustache. "And before you ask why I didn't report it, half the trucks in winter smell like bad decisions. Didn't know we were collecting sins." "You remember which trucks?" Otis pointed to a handwritten note. "Unit 12, Unit 17, and a smaller white utility pickup Wesley drives when he wants to look important without paperwork." Graham photographed the page. Otis leaned against the loader. "Silas know?" "That's the question." Otis's face tightened. His humor, Graham had noticed, was like an old coat. He wore it when the weather turned cruel, but underneath it he felt more than he wanted anyone to see. "5 years ago," Otis said, "Silas hauled a generator to my sister's place when nobody else could get up that road. Her oxygen machine was out. He didn't charge her a cent." Graham said nothing. "That kind of thing sticks to a man," Otis continued. "Makes you slow to think ill of him. Gratitude isn't blindness." "No," Otis said, "but it sure can fog the windshield." That evening, the town hall filled with people who had come for road closure updates and stayed because rumor had already arrived, wearing snow boots. Silas Trent stood near the front before the meeting began, moving from group to group with his clean coat, his smooth hair, and his careful warmth. He clapped men on shoulders, asked after wives by name, praised the road crews, and spoke loudly enough for nearby ears to hear that fear helped no one in hard weather. Wesley stood at the back wall, keys at his belt, hands in his pockets, eyes elsewhere. Maeve opened the meeting with facts: storm windows, water testing, temporary caution around Hollow Creek access, and a reminder that emergency permits would be reviewed before the next front. She did not name suspects. She did not have to. Silas raised his hand like a concerned citizen in a church committee. "Sheriff, nobody here wants unsafe water," he said, voice rich with practiced reason. "But I hope we're careful not to start rumors that hurt people trying to help. My company has relief equipment to move before this next cold snap. If folks start treating every truck like a criminal, some elderly people may sit in cold houses because of gossip." Murmurs moved through the room. Graham sat near the side aisle, feeling the old machinery of public opinion turn. Silas was good. He did not deny. He did not attack. He wrapped himself in vulnerable people and dared anyone to look cruel by questioning him. A woman in a red parka stood 2 rows ahead. "Mr. Trent helped this town before." "He did," Maeve said. "Then why are people whispering like he's poison?" Silas lowered his head as if embarrassed by loyalty. Graham could have stayed quiet. He was very good at it. But Atlas was lying beside a stove with a torn harness strap sealed in a bag because silence had been convenient for too many people. Graham stood. The room turned toward him with the alert curiosity reserved for bears, recluses, and men who rarely spoke in public. He did not raise his voice. "Being grateful to a man shouldn't make you drink dirty water." The sentence landed without drama. That made it heavier. Silas's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "That sounds like an accusation, Graham." "No," Graham said. "Pah, it sounds like a principle." Otis, from the back, muttered loudly enough for 3 rows to hear. "Dangerous things, principles, hard to invoice." A nervous ripple of laughter passed through the room and broke the tension just enough for people to breathe. Maeve used the opening. "No one is being accused in this room tonight. We are checking water, checking permits, and checking routes. If everything is clean, the facts will say so. If not, they'll say that too." After the meeting, people did not crowd Maeve all at once. They approached her one by one. A rancher named Dale Kincaid had in both hands said his cattle had refused the South Trough 2 mornings running. A road crew driver remembered seeing Trent taillights near the upper closed route at 4 a.m., though at the time he assumed it was emergency work. A young woman from the gas station told Rowan over a private call that Wesley had paid cash for 6 fuel cans and asked whether the security cameras were still half useless in snow glare. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind people dismissed until someone gave them permission to matter. By the time Graham returned to the cabin, darkness had settled blue over the trees. Inside, Rowan was at the table, permits spread before her, but she was not reading. She was watching Atlas sleep. "He ate for you," she said. Graham hung his coat by the door. "He was hungry. He refused for me. He's mad you keep apologizing." Rowan looked at him. Graham moved to the stove, uncomfortable with how much truth he had accidentally spoken. Lillian had left earlier for the clinic, but had returned at dusk with more medication and a verdict Rowan had been avoiding all day. Atlas could recover well. He could walk, play, nap in sunlight, argue with squirrels through windows, and grow old with dignity. He should not return to active K-9 duty. The words had remained in the cabin after Lillian drove away, sitting in every corner like cold air. Rowan reached for the silver training whistle at her throat. Her thumb rubbed its edge. "I thought if he couldn't work with me, I was losing him," she said. Graham poured coffee into 2 mugs. His coffee was strong enough to make lesser men confess to crimes. "Maybe you're losing the job he did." "That's supposed to comfort me?" "No, it's supposed to be accurate." She accepted the mug and took 1 sip. Her face tightened. This coffee could strip paint. It's coffee. It's a legal summons in liquid form. Weak coffee is colored water with ambition. For the first time since the meeting, Rowan laughed properly. It was small, tired, and surprised to be alive. Atlas opened one eye and exhaled through his nose with the weary patience of an old judge forced to hear fools flirt over evidence. The sound undid both of them. Not because it was funny, though it was. Because it was normal. Pain had not taken that from him. He could still be annoyed, still be present, still be Atlas. Rowan set the mug down and slid carefully from the chair to sit beside him. She did not ask him to stand. She did not say partner in that sharp working tone he had known for years. She only rested her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You don't have to earn staying," she whispered. Atlas did not lift his head, but his tail moved once. Graham looked away toward the window, giving them privacy. Outside, the moonlight made the snow blue. The scorched mark on the woodshed remained visible, a black bruise on the clean yard. The radio cracked near 10. Maeve's voice came through, clipped and awake. "I've got enough for an emergency inspection order on Trent's convoy. Judge signed it. We stopped the main trucks in town at first light." Rowan straightened. "Good." Graham walked to the table, where the maps still lay open. He traced the official upper service route with one finger, then looked at the older markings beneath it. A thought moved through him slowly. Not fear. Recognition. "If they get stopped in town," he said, "Wesley won't stay with the main convoy." Maeve was silent for a beat. "Explain." Graham tapped the map. "He'll split off before the checkpoint. Smaller truck, white utility pickup. Miller's Cut still gives him access to the old drainage site." Rowan stood too fast, caught herself on the table, and cursed softly. Graham followed the faint line through the trees. The route curved close to the lower ridge, then narrowed past the old timber gate, then cut across a stand of pines that most maps no longer bothered naming. It passed within half a mile of his cabin. Atlas lifted his head as if the room's tension had become a sound. Maeve's voice came back through the radio. "Can he reach the pipe before we stop him?" Graham looked through the window at the dark forest beyond the porch light. "Yes," he said, "if he leaves early enough." Rowan's hand tightened around the back of a chair. Graham folded the map once, not taking his eyes off the line. "Then we make sure he doesn't." Morning came too beautiful for what waited inside it. Fresh snow lay over Bitterroot Valley like clean linen pulled tight across a bed. The roofs of town shone under a thin winter sun. Fence wires glittered. The windows of June Pritchard's diner flashed silver whenever the clouds shifted, and for a while the whole place looked less like a town preparing to confront a crime than a postcard someone had forgotten to dirty with truth. Graham Voss stood at the edge of his porch before dawn, coffee in one hand, radio in the other. Behind him, inside the cabin, Atlas lay near the stove under Dr. Lillian Price's watch. The German shepherd was awake. His ears moved whenever a voice came through the radio, but his body stayed down. Lillian had made it clear that if Atlas so much as considered heroics, she would personally lecture him into retirement before breakfast. Rowan Mercer had been cleared for limited duty, which in Lillian's language meant, "You may help if you remember you are not made of iron and spite." Rowan had accepted that with the face of a person who believed she was at least partly made of both. Maeve's plan had been built in layers. At first light, she would stop Silas Trent's main convoy in town under the emergency inspection order. The reason would be simple: weight verification, cargo inspection, route safety, and water contamination inquiry. Public, legal, impossible to dismiss as harassment. Rowan and Clara Dunn would move toward the storage yard listed on the transport papers, where the cargo was supposedly being staged. Graham, Otis Bellamy, and 2 deputy reserves would cover Miller's Cut, the old timber trail Wesley Trent could use if he broke away with the smaller white utility pickup. Nobody called it a trap. Small-town law had better manners than that. But Otis, arriving in his heavy tow rig with a thermos tucked under one arm and a face full of grim cheer, called it a civic inconvenience with teeth. Graham looked at him. "You rehearse that?" "All my best lines come uninvited." Otis glanced through the cabin window at Atlas. The dog's head was up, amber eyes following the men outside. "He staying put?" "Lillian's in there." Otis nodded. "Then that dog is safer than the governor." By 7:30, the convoy appeared on the West Road. 3 large trucks, 2 flatbeds, and Silas Trent's polished black SUV rolled toward town beneath flashing amber roof lights. On the doors, the Trent logo looked clean and generous. A pine tree, a mountain lion, and the words, "Winter Relief Transport," printed under the company name. It was the kind of branding that made wrongdoing look like community service. Silas stepped from his SUV outside the checkpoint with a smile already in place. He wore his charcoal coat, his expensive boots, and the look of a man ready to forgive everyone for inconveniencing him. "Sheriff," he called, opening both hands. "Cold morning for paperwork." Maeve stood in the road with 2 deputies, a clipboard, and the calm expression of a woman who had brought enough law to outlast charm. "Morning, Silas. We'll need all drivers to step out and present manifests." His smile held. "Of course, but I hope we can move efficiently. People are waiting on heat. We'll move as fast as the facts allow." That dented the smile slightly. Around them, town watched without pretending not to. Road workers paused with shovels. June stood inside the diner window with both arms folded. A few ranchers leaned against trucks. Gratitude, suspicion, embarrassment, and cold air mixed together over the street. Silas looked at the watchers and widened his voice. "I understand caution, I really do. But I'd hate to see fear punish the people who need help." Maeve did not raise her voice. "Nobody is punishing help." "We're inspecting cargo." A deputy opened the rear of the first truck. The boxes nearest the door were heaters. Real ones? New? Clean? Enough to make any accusation look foolish if one stopped looking there. Maeve did not stop. She had the driver unload the first layer. Silas's jaw moved once. On the south edge of town, Rowan and Clara arrived at the Trent storage yard in Clara's borrowed Subaru, following a deputy's cruiser at a distance. The yard was a chain-link square behind an old grain warehouse, where snow had been plowed into dirty walls along the fence. According to the papers, it held blankets, portable heaters, generator housings, and insulation pallets. The gate was locked. Rowan showed the inspection order to the nervous yard clerk, a young man with red ears and a vest 2 sizes too thin for the weather. He looked at the paper, then at Rowan's badge, then at Clara's sample case. "I was told nobody comes in without Mr. Trent." Rowan's face did not change. "You were told wrong." He opened the gate. Inside the warehouse, Cold sat in the corners like an animal. The first pallets matched the paperwork: blankets, heater boxes, plastic-wrapped equipment. Clara walked between them with her tablet, scanning labels and checking lot numbers. Then Rowan noticed the floor. Near the far wall, a strip of gray slush had gathered under a row of containers marked Portable Thermal Housing. The containers were too heavy for the printed label. The straps were new. The labels had been placed over older ones, and one corner had peeled where condensation had frozen beneath the adhesive. Rowan crouched. Clara came beside her and whispered, "That residue." "I know." They peeled back the label. Underneath was a hazard code partially scratched away. Clara went very still. Rowan radioed Maeve. We've got mislabeled containers, possible industrial waste, some leakage." Static answered first, then Maeve's voice. "Document everything. Do not open without proper gear." "Copy." Clara photographed the hazard code. Her hands were steady now, no longer anxious. Fear had burned down into purpose. They covered it with relief labels. Rowan looked across the cold warehouse, at blankets stacked in front of poison, at the costume of mercy hung over rot. "That's Silas," she said. "Hide the knife in a gift box." At almost the same time, Graham and Otis waited at the mouth of Miller's Cut. The old timber trail lay half-hidden under snow, curving between pines toward the ridge. To most drivers, it looked impassable. To Graham, it looked like an invitation to someone desperate enough and arrogant enough to trust a machine over land. 2 reserve deputies waited farther back, out of sight. Otis had positioned his tow rig near the south spur, angled badly on purpose. "You understand," Otis said, patting the dashboard. "This truck has never once died when I wanted it to. If it performs now, I may have to apologize to it." "Try not to make it emotional." "Everything with engines is emotional. That's why they betray you." Graham watched the upper road through binoculars. At 8:12, the white utility pickup broke from the convoy route before the main checkpoint. It took a plowed lane behind the maintenance sheds, lights off despite the morning haze, then cut toward the timber road. Wesley. "Here he comes," Graham said. Otis's humor vanished. "You sure?" Small truck, white, moving like guilt has an appointment. Otis grunted and turned the key. The tow rig roared awake like an elderly dragon insulted out of sleep. Wesley's pickup entered Miller's Cut too fast. The truck fish-tailed once where packed snow turned to hidden ice, corrected, then pushed on. Graham moved on foot through the trees, not chasing, not yet. He knew where the trail narrowed. He knew where an old timber gate still hung between 2 posts, forgotten by everyone except men who remembered the shape of old roads. He reached the gate before Wesley did. The chain was already looped around the post. Graham pulled it tight and dropped the heavy pin through the bracket. A minute later the pickup came around the bend. Wesley saw the closed gate and braked hard. The truck slid sideways, stopping short with its front bumper nearly kissing the chain. Behind him, Otis's tow rig lurched into view at the south exit and stopped with magnificent theatrical failure across the trail. Otis opened his door and shouted, "Well, I'll be. Machine quit. Tragic timing." Wesley slammed his palm against the steering wheel. Then he reversed. The pickup's back tires spun, dug, caught, and slid into the soft shoulder. Snow swallowed the rear axle with quiet satisfaction. Graham stepped into view. For a moment, the forest held them in a white bowl of silence. Wesley got out slowly. He wore black gloves, a dark coat, and the expression of a man who had not expected the land itself to take sides. "You don't have authority to block this road," Wesley said. Graham rested one hand on the gatepost. "Road's closed." "By who?" "Winter." Wesley's eyes flicked toward the trees, calculating. Graham saw the decision before Wesley made it. The man ran, not toward Otis, not back down the trail. He bolted into the pines, carrying a black satchel over one shoulder. Graham followed. He did not sprint as a younger man might have. He did not need to. Wesley ran like someone fleeing a room. Graham moved like someone reading terrain. The snow betrayed speed. It filled boots, hid roots, made lungs burn. Wesley crashed through brush, slipping twice. Graham cut left, using a shallow rise where the crust held better. Ahead lay a drainage dip, covered by a skin of white. Graham knew it. In summer, it was a trickle. In winter, it was a liar. "Stop!" Graham called. Wesley looked back. That was enough. His next step punched through the crust. One leg plunged into the hidden runnel up to the thigh, and momentum threw him forward into the snow. The satchel flew from his shoulder and landed near a stump. Graham reached him seconds later and kicked the satchel away, not hard, just out of reach. Wesley twisted, reaching inside his coat. "Don't," Graham said. There was no shout in it. That made it carry. Wesley froze. Branches snapped behind them. Rowan emerged between the pines with 2 deputies, her face pale from exertion but steady, her badge bright against her parka. She had come from the warehouse route, not alone, not reckless. Approved, timed, ready. "Wesley Trent," she said, breath fogging in the cold. "You're under arrest." The fury in Wesley's face was almost childish. "You don't know what you're doing?" Rowan stepped closer while one deputy secured his hands. "I know exactly what you were carrying." The satchel contained folded drainage maps, a portable igniter, fuel tabs, and a compact pump controller. Enough to destroy the hidden tubing, burn the staging remains, and turn a crime scene back into rumor. Rowan looked at Graham once. He nodded, just slightly. She did not smile. The moment did not call for it. Justice, when it arrived properly, did not always feel triumphant. Sometimes it felt like finally dragging something heavy into daylight. Back in town, Silas Trent's performance was ending in pieces. The first truck had checked clean. So had part of the second. Then the deputies reached the rear pallets of the third, where relief boxes hid sealed drums with scraped hazard labels. Maeve stood with the manifests in one hand and Rowan's warehouse report coming through her radio. Silas stopped smiling. It was a small thing at first, a muscle giving up near the mouth. Then the eyes changed. Without the smile, his face looked older, heavier, less like a benefactor than a man who had spent too long asking his own reflection for forgiveness. "You don't understand," he said. Maeve closed the manifest. "That's rarely a good opening. I kept people employed. You know what happens if Trent Transport goes under? You know how many families depend on me?" June Pritchard had come out of the diner by then, wiping her hands on her apron, though there was nothing on them. Otis's sister stood near the pharmacy door. A road crew driver lowered his eyes. The town listened. Silas looked around, searching for the old gratitude. It was still there. That was the worst part. People did remember what he had done. They remembered the generators, the fuel, the ice storm. But now those memories stood beside gray water, false labels, and a wounded dog. A town could hold both things at once. That was what broke him. Maeve stepped forward. "Silas Trent, you're under arrest, pending charges related to illegal transport, falsified manifests, obstruction, reckless endangerment, and contamination of protected water sources." As she cuffed him, no one cheered. Small towns did not always celebrate justice. Sometimes they just stood very still while a story they had believed in fell off the wall. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had been contained. The hidden tubing was secured. Clara had state environmental response on the way. Wesley and Silas were both in custody. The relief equipment that was real would be distributed by the county because need did not become fake just because a liar used it as cover. When Graham returned to the cabin, his boots were wet to the ankle and his old field jacket smelled of snow and pine bark. Atlas lifted his head before the door fully opened. Lillian sat beside him, one hand on his shoulder. He tried to stand when he heard sirens. "Of course he did," Graham said. He crossed the room and knelt in front of the dog. Atlas's amber eyes searched him, reading blood, scent, breath, outcome. Graham placed one hand on the dog's chest, over the small triangle of gold fur. "Not today, old man," he said softly. "Today somebody else stood watch for you." Atlas blinked. Then, with great dignity, he lowered his head back to the blanket. Rowan came in a few minutes later. She looked exhausted, windburned, and more at peace than she had any right to be. She removed her gloves slowly, as if each motion had to pass through thought before becoming real. Then she sat on the floor beside Atlas. No badge voice, no command tone, only Rowan. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not because you got hurt. I'll be sorry for that a long time." Her breath trembled once. I'm sorry I thought you had to keep working to still be you." Atlas lifted his muzzle and licked her chin. Lillian made a suspicious sound and turned toward her medical bag, giving everyone the courtesy of pretending she had not nearly cried. Graham looked at the stove. Maeve's radio voice came in from Rowan's shoulder mic, low but clear. "Lillian there?" Lillian picked up. "I'm here." "County needs your formal recommendation for Atlas's status." The room settled. Lillian looked at Atlas, then at Rowan. Her face was gentle. Her voice was not. "He'll recover," she said, "but he should retire from active duty." Rowan closed her eyes. Graham felt the words move through the cabin, not as an ending exactly, but as a gate swinging open onto a road none of them had planned to take. Atlas, unconcerned with bureaucracy, looked toward his food bowl. And somehow, after poison, lies, snow, and fear, that ordinary hunger felt like the first honest thing the day had offered. By the last weeks of winter, Bitterroot Valley had begun to loosen its fist. The snow did not leave all at once. It never did. It retreated in patient inches from fence posts, from porch steps, from the low roofs of barns that had carried it without complaint. Icicles along Graham Voss's cabin eaves began to drip in the afternoons, each drop striking the packed snow below with the soft insistence of a clock that had remembered spring. The pines still stood white along the ridge, but the light had changed. It stayed longer now. That seemed to matter more than anyone wanted to admit. Silas and Wesley Trent were in county custody first, then moved through the slow machinery of charges, hearings, statements, and evidence. The State Environmental Response Team sealed the drainage site above Hollow Creek, removed the hidden tubing, and marked contaminated patches with flags that looked strangely cheerful against the snow. Clara Dunn spent 3 weeks collecting samples with the focus of a woman who had stopped apologizing for being careful. The reservoir had been spared the worst, not untouched. No one lied and called it untouched, but caught in time. Bitterroot did not throw a celebration. People there were not made for banners and speeches unless a high school team won something. Instead, gratitude appeared in quieter disguises. Firewood stacked on Graham's porch when he was not home. A pie left in Rowan Mercer's cruiser with a note that only said, "Eat before arguing." A new heater installed at Dr. Lillian Price's clinic by someone who refused to send an invoice. Otis Bellamy denied involvement in all good deeds, including the ones that still had his bootprints around them. "I don't do charity," he told Graham one morning, unloading lumber behind the cabin. "I suffer from accidental generosity. Doctors say it's seasonal." Graham looked at the fresh boards in the truck bed. You accidentally bought cedar? It fell into the truck. Then you accidentally drove 12 miles? Road was slippery, couldn't stop. Atlas, standing carefully near the porch steps, watched the exchange with solemn interest. His right hind leg still favored the ground cautiously, but he was standing. Not long, not far, but standing. The first time he had managed it without shaking, Rowan had turned away so fast Graham pretended not to notice the tears. The dog had changed, not in the way people feared. He was still Atlas, broad head, black muzzle, amber eyes that missed very little, the golden triangle of fur on his chest catching light whenever he sat by the window. His notched right ear still bent when he was tired. He still disapproved of unnecessary noise, weak coffee, and Otis's claim that he was not a dog person. But his body had learned new laws. He could not launch himself into motion the way he once had. He could not spend a day tracking through ridges, sirens, warehouses, and winter roads. Some mornings he rose slowly, with the stiff dignity of an old soldier negotiating with his own bones. Graham understood that negotiation. So did Rowan, though accepting it took longer. She came to the cabin often after the arrest. At first, she came because Atlas needed medication and dressing changes. Then because Lillian asked her to help with short walks. Then because there were forms to discuss, reports to file, and updates to deliver. Eventually, she came because she came. She would park near the lower track, sit in her cruiser for 2 or 3 minutes, then step out with coffee, papers, or some excuse thin enough to see daylight through. Graham never called it an excuse. She never called it fear. That was one kindness they gave each other. The official recommendation came from Lillian in writing. Atlas could recover well with stable care, controlled movement, and a calm environment. He should not return to active K-9 duty. The county approved early retirement after a review that involved too many signatures, 2 meetings, 1 lost form, and Maeve Calder saying with the patience of a woman sharpening a blade that if anyone misplaced the medical packet again, she would personally reorganize the records office by fear. Rowan signed the retirement request on a Thursday afternoon. She did it at Graham's kitchen table. Atlas slept by the stove, one paw twitching in whatever dream old working dogs were allowed to have. Graham stood at the sink, giving her room. He knew enough now not to crowd grief just because it wore a uniform. Rowan held the pen for a long time. I thought signing this would feel like betraying him, she said. Graham did not turn around. Does it? No. She breathed in, unsteady but honest. It feels like admitting he's more than what he did for me. Outside, snow slid from a branch in a soft rush. Rowan signed. The pen made a small sound against the paper. Nothing heroic, nothing grand. Yet the room seemed to shift around it. Atlas opened one eye, saw no immediate reason to supervise bureaucracy, and went back to sleep. Graham said, "He seems devastated." Rowan let out a watery laugh. He always respected paperwork less than criminals. That was the first day she did not apologize to the dog, not because she had stopped being sorry. Some sorrow becomes part of the furniture of the heart, but she no longer offered it to Atlas like a chain. The harder question came afterward. Where would Atlas live? Rowan loved him. That was not in doubt. If love alone had been the measure, she would have carried him home and built her life around him without hesitation. But her shifts were unpredictable. The radio, the cruiser, the sudden calls, the smell of tense rooms and winter roads, all of it stirred Atlas before his body was ready. Twice, when dispatch crackled from her shoulder mic, he tried to rise too fast. The third time, he yelped. Rowan went still. Lillian, who had been changing his wrap, looked at her with painful gentleness. He needs quiet before he needs loyalty. He is loyal, Rowan said. I know. That's why we have to be careful what we ask of him. No one mentioned Graham at first. Atlas did. Not by choosing with ceremony, because dogs were wiser than ceremony. He chose through small habits. He ate when Graham set the bowl down. He slept more deeply beside Graham's stove. He rested his muzzle on Graham's glove when the cabin grew quiet. He greeted Rowan with joy, always, but when the wind struck the walls or a truck passed on the lower road, his eyes looked for Graham. The truth did not arrive as thunder. It arrived as a food bowl beside the stove, a blanket that stayed, a dog's breathing at night becoming part of the house. Graham resisted longer than Rowan expected. I'm not the county kennel, he said the first time Maeve raised the subject. Maeve, sitting at his table with a mug of coffee strong enough to qualify as evidence, said, Nobody accused you of being that organized." "I live alone?" "You used to." He looked at her. Maeve sipped the coffee, winced, and continued anyway. "I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to notice you already made one." Graham did notice. That was the problem. He noticed when he woke before dawn and listened for Atlas's breathing. He noticed when he repaired the porch step so the dog would not have to lift his leg too high. He noticed when he bought a new water bowl in town and then stood in the aisle, staring at it like it might explode into responsibility. He feared the simple things most: a collar hanging by the door, fur on his sleeves, a creature who believed home meant Graham would return. Trust had always frightened him more than danger. Danger asked for skill. Trust asked for the part of a man that could still be broken. One evening he took the cracked military compass from his coat pocket and set it on the table beside Atlas's collar. The compass had belonged to another life, one where Bishop had run ahead into dust and fire with faith in men who were only men. Atlas lifted his head and sniffed it. Graham watched him. "I failed one of you once," he said quietly. Atlas's tail moved against the floor. Not absolution, not judgment. Both, only presence. Graham sat down beside him and, for a long while, did not move. 2 days later, he signed the adoption papers. Rowan cried in her truck afterward where she thought no one could see. Graham saw. He did not go to her, not immediately. He waited until she stepped out, eyes clear enough to pretend with dignity, and handed her a cup of coffee. She took one sip and frowned. "This still tastes like a campfire suit of coffee bean." "You came back for it." "I came back for the dog." "Of course." Atlas from the porch gave a low huff that sounded suspiciously like disbelief. After that, Rowan remained part of his life. Not as a former handler banished from a retired dog's new home, but as family learning a new shape. She came on Sundays, then Wednesdays, sometimes with medication, sometimes with reports, sometimes with 2 coffees and no explanation. A second mug appeared in Graham's cupboard and never left. A pair of Rowan's boots found a place beside the door after one storm lasted longer than expected. Neither of them commented on it. Some things were too delicate to survive being named too early. The shed behind the cabin changed next. At first, Graham only meant to repair the burned wood. Then Otis arrived with cedar boards that had fallen into the truck. Lillian brought washable bedding and 2 spare crates from the clinic. Maeve helped with county paperwork and warned Graham that if he called the place a kennel, she would fine him for lack of imagination. Rowan contacted a retired K-9 support group in Helena. By the end of March, the old shed had become a warm little room with clean plank floors, 2 wide resting pens, hooks for leashes, shelves for medical supplies, and a south-facing window where sunlight pooled in the afternoon. Graham painted a small wooden sign himself. The back porch. Otis stared at it. Sounds like a place where old men complain about knees. Graham looked at Atlas, who was lying in a square of sun with one ear bent. Exactly. Lillian smiled at that. Rowan did too. Graham did not say the full meaning aloud. He did not have to. Every creature that had served long enough deserved a place to rest without proving its worth. A porch, a patch of sun, a bowl that stayed filled, a door that opened before the second knock. The first temporary guest arrived in early April, an old detection dog recovering from surgery while his handler traveled for training. Atlas greeted him with dignified suspicion, then allowed him half the sunbeam by the window. Otis claimed the arrangement would fail because 2 retired professionals can't share management. By evening, both dogs were asleep, and Otis was sitting on a crate feeding them biscuits. "I still don't like dogs," he announced. "No one asked," Rowan said. The final snow of the season came lightly. Graham stood on the porch that morning in his field jacket, the olive drab shirt visible beneath it. The camouflage sleeves faded and familiar. A few flakes settled in his dark hair, catching at the gray near his temples. The brass casing wind chime moved above him, clicking softly in the breeze. Years ago, that sound had reminded him of things ending. Now it sounded like a house remembering how to speak. Atlas lay beside his boots, not guarding, not waiting for orders, just being. His muzzle rested on Graham's glove, his eyes half closed with the royal patience of a dog who had survived work, pain, and human guilt, and had decided breakfast remained the strongest argument for hope. A truck rolled up the lower track. Atlas lifted his head before Graham heard it. Rowan stepped out with 2 coffees and a scarf the color of warm brick wrapped at her throat. She climbed the porch steps as if she had done it all her life. She handed Graham 1 cup. He took it. No thanks, no question, no careful joke to hide behind. Just acceptance, quiet as snow, landing on pine. For a while they stood together and watched the forest brighten. Then Atlas turned his notched ear toward the trees. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked under melting ice. He listened, considered, then looked up at Graham. Graham rested a hand on the dog's head. "All right, old man," he said. "We hear it." Rowan looked at him. "We?" Graham watched the snow drift down through the morning light. The word had slipped out easily. That was how he knew it was true. The wind moved through the brass casings again, and this time the sound did not feel like ghosts. It felt like a door chime. And when life knocked after that, Graham Voss no longer waited for the second sound. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a dog resting by the fire, a second cup of coffee on the porch, or a door opened when fear says to keep it closed. Graham, Rowan, and Atlas remind us that we are not only valuable when we are strong, useful, or unbroken. Grace often meets us after the battle when we are tired enough to finally receive care. May your own home have a little more peace tonight. And if this story touched something in you, share your thoughts in the comments, pass it to someone who may need hope, and subscribe for the next story. God bless you, and may you always find your way back to the porch where you are loved.